Back from when I started, there were a lot less options in terms of platforms, what you could do, especially as a writer, but also as a creator in general, right? There was no TikTok then, there was no money to be made on Medium. And then now you have places like Substack, you have all kinds of tools and platforms and ways where you can go. So it's really easy to get baited into one or all of them potentially sequentially. 6 months later, you're like, this platform has this problem, this platform has that problem. So in the end, I did a very long trip. It was a very long round trip to go back to my own website at the end of the day and realize, man, this is the place where I should be writing first. So think about ownership first. Just make sure that you have your copyright, like your intellectual property, the ownership, that part is sort of secured and you have that covered. Because if it's going to be a long-term thing for you, and you might not know that, but if that's your aspiration, if you want it to be a long-term thing, you're going to need that. Otherwise, you keep trawling from platform to platform and you don't have anything to show for it at the end of the day.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook podcast, where we share inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today we have with us Niklas Goeke, who's the founder and CEO of 4 Minute Books. It's a collection of over 1,000 free summaries available online that only take 4 minutes to read and consume. How are you doing today, Nick?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
So for the listeners, we know each other pretty well. We had lunch last week and we've known each other for some time now. So we met through Medium. So Nick has written for Entrepreneur's Handbook in the past, and he was the editor of Better Marketing, for those of you familiar with Medium as well. But he started off as just a writer, but has now become a full-fledged entrepreneur. And that's what we want to talk about today. So how did that happen, Nick? How did you go from kind of being interested in writing to then setting up a business and an enterprise about that?
Okay, so let me try to give the short-ish version of where it all started. I was born and raised in Germany. I went to college for a business and engineering degree. And as part of that, in my undergrad, I went to the US to study abroad for a bit. And that was the first time where I was just confronted with entrepreneurship, both entrepreneurship and sort of, let's say, nonfiction literature in a more intense way. I literally had my statistics professor recommend the 4-hour work week to me, which would never happen in a German college, like never ever. And that was fascinating. So I got to know some of the people who wrote the kind of like nonfiction bestsellers, those kind of books around that time. And I got into those. I read The Alchemist, I think, while I was there, and that had made some impact on me. And so generally, I was reading a lot of blogs. It was 2012, 2013. So it was the heyday of people like James Altucher's blog, Ramit Sethi, Tim Ferriss. And I was reading those blogs a lot. And at some point in the back of my mind, I just had this thought that, I want to write a blog too and just somehow make money. Like these guys all seem to be doing fine and they seem to just have fun and goof off on the internet. And I would love to do that. And that was sort of where it all began, because I was on track to go into consulting. And I realized way before I ever started that was not for me. And so that's when I first gravitated towards writing. And then after I got my undergrad, I decided to take a year off, but actually incorporate or become a sole proprietor, start a business, be self-employed as a writer. I had no idea like what I was going to do. And so I was totally winging it. But I said, let me just take this year. And if not, then I can just go back to school. And in that year, I did translations, German to English, because I always loved English. I went to the US to study and so on. I started my own blog. I started writing there, practicing a little bit. And after that first year, I also made some money, not a lot. It was something like 20 grand or something at the time. It was like, you can kind of make it work, but then you don't pay a lot of taxes. But and so I was like, okay, yeah, I think there's something there. I want to continue on this path. And so I did that. I eventually did go back to school also, but I kept working full time on the side. And initially, so I was just freelancing. So I started with a general interest in writing for fun, writing for me. And then I sort of added freelancing monetization on top because I wanted to make that work as a business. And that's also around the time I discovered Medium, 2014-ish, late 2014. So I was just dabbling in I was writing on my own blog. I was writing on Medium for Better Humans specifically, because that was for the Coach.me coaches. So I was coaching people around habits and whatnot. So that slowly evolved. And then about a year later, in late 2015, I just wanted to make some kind of New Year's resolution to write more and practice more and get better faster. And that was sort of the original intention of why I started 4-Minute Books. And then the project, 4-Minute Books, became this project, this outlet for me to do this daily writing, daily publishing, daily practicing of writing. And it also had some monetization built in from the start, because I was like, if I make some money along the way from that, that would be nice. And yeah, so that just that became this initially it was like a 1-year project where I wrote a book summary every day for a year. And spoiler alert, like I didn't read all the books, of course, like I didn't have that kind of time. But because I succeeded sort of in doing this project and writing like a book summary, publishing something every day for a year, that really helped. And it also helped the platform get going. And so by the end of that year, I could pay my rent from the site's income. We had around 10,000 visitors every month. And so I was like, okay, cool, nice. This kind of, it worked out somewhat against the odds. And that's sort of how the first year, how it initially came into being. So it was very haphazard, as you can tell, right? It's not like, I never set out to make it a big business from the start or make it a startup or raise funding or anything like that. It was more like it grew out of this personal interest, desire to become a writer. And then it had some monetization built in from the start. And that's sort of what made it more businessy. And then it got more businessy over time.
So that's really interesting, because I think a lot of writers, they just think about how they can make money from either platforms or from like freelancing, whereas you went and built your own website to have your own strategy there. How did you monetize that initially? Like, what was your ideas to start off with?
So initially, because what I was doing essentially, what I started with was at that point, I had read about, let's say like 30, 40 self-help books, which I also liked. And so I began summarizing those. But I was also this power user of Blinkist for like a year at that point, I want to say. And a friend had sent me that at some point, and it's a German company, so I knew they were in Berlin and stuff, but they also did all their book summaries in English. And so I found out they have an affiliate program. And so I was like, okay, maybe I can use this because, and this is still me thinking in sort of how can I practice writing? How can I evolve more creatively? Which was that every day, if I want to write something that's 1,000-word blog post that I can actually ship every day, I need to have a simple system. And the system for me was you get one input and you make one output out of it. And so the input were the Blinkist book summaries and the output were my summaries, which were basically just 3 lessons, sort of a teaser for the book, if you will. And so that's kind of like Blinkist basically helped me pull this thing together in the first place. Because in the beginning, it took me around 3 to 4 hours to put together one post because I was slow and so on. And so that was the way I made it manageable. And then because I was already on there and I was using that, and I realized they have an affiliate program, I was like, okay, let me just promote Blinkist because that's what I'm doing anyway, like using their stuff and also writing book summaries. And they do book summaries just much more professionally, much larger scale, big team behind it. They have a subscription offering. They have an app. They have all these things I can't nor want to do. So let me promote them. And so that was the only thing I think that was baked in. Maybe some Amazon affiliate links on top for the books. So I would link the title of the book to Amazon, but I think that was about it. And so Blinkist was definitely the main affiliate strategy, and it's also the main income generator for the first at least 3 years, I want to say 3 or 4 years.
And how did you convert people to reading your free summaries to actually buying the Blinkist membership?
So my summaries, I did SEO on from the beginning. So I optimized those for search engines, for Google. I had this very little simple formula, which is you give the title of a book plus the word summary, right? And then you just go from those. And I started with somewhat popular books, and then I just kept going with whatever I found interesting, whatever I would summarize. So it was not super strategic in the beginning, but I had enough popular books so that the site started attracting some actual traffic. So it was a bit of search engine optimization on my part, basically, to try and rank the site and the summaries to get traffic from Google. And then when those people would come and read the summaries, I would have ads for Blinkist. And the ads is just me directly placing stuff. So I would have a form at the end of each summary that says, hey, if you want more, you can start a free trial for Blinkist. I wrote a review of Blinkist also, and I made a video. I wrote a long explainer post. What is Blinkist in the first place? So I reviewed both their mobile and desktop apps, and that got a good amount of people. And then I also, at some point, I had a page that's basically just, if people are looking for a coupon for Blinkist specifically, I would do that. I would also, again, explain what's Blinkist in a nutshell, what is the pricing, what does it look like with and without the coupon, and then here is a button, you can go and redeem that. And yes, and I think to give some rough numbers, I think after, because in month 3 or 4 in April, I think of the first year, I think at that point I had made around $700 total from this, right? So it was like started as a very small side income kind of thing. But yeah, that was the original monetization strategy. And then by the end of the first year, I think I want to say it was around 2,000 a month between some Amazon affiliate links and probably the Blinkist thing. But the Blinkist affiliate was the main thing that was doing revenue, and that was also growing because the traffic of the site kept growing, and then the Blinkist conversion sort of scaled along.
How much time were you spending on this point? Because you've said it was initially you were mainly focused on your own creative writing, but then you had 4-minute books as well. How did that split change over time of how much time you're spending on the different parts?
The first year, I spent a lot of time on 4-minute books. I started the year by getting up at 5 a.m. and I would write the summary first thing in the morning, and I would, however long that took. So I would do that, and then I would sort of go about my normal day, do some freelance work, coaching, whatever else I was doing at the time, my own creative writing, my blog. But that came down over time to the point where I could write a summary in between an hour and 2 probably on average. But then, of course, there was a lot of other stuff to do, just like setting up the site itself, making sure, when things break, HTML, little code optimizations, tiny bits. I'm not a coder, but I can do some little CSS stuff and whatnot. And then, of course, new initiatives also, right? I tried adding some other affiliate things or making a course, other resources. I think I made a reading course in that same year to try and attract more users and email subscribers to the site. So I think in that first year, I probably spent at least 1,000 hours on the site. And that was the first year. And then after that first year, I actually scaled down a lot because the experiment in that sense had succeeded. Okay, I had managed to write a post a day. The site got some traffic. It made some money. But the second year, I was like, I cannot do this again. I cannot do this 2 years in a row. So I really scaled down. I went to one summary a week, and I think I stayed there. And this was still all me doing everything and me writing all the summaries also. And I think I did that for 2 years, where I wrote just one summary a week. I spent significantly less time on the site, let's say a few hundred hours in those years, but the traffic actually kept going up. So that was just because Google kept sending us more traffic, it was just working. And so I got lucky in that sense that I actually didn't put in a lot of time in this sort of second phase where the site was still growing. That's when it went down. And then after that, it went back and forth a bit. So right now I'm working a lot on it. But in between, I had a few years where I was doing a lot of other stuff, writing much more on Medium and so on. So it oscillated over the years. But for the first part, like the first year was very intense, was a lot. And then the second and third year was much, much less. And then it kept going back and forth. And now I'm working pretty much full time on it because I sort of came back to it. But I guess we'll get to that.
And how many views a month do you get now?
So right now we get about 1 million views a month, 1 million page views, and it's about 350,000 or so unique visitors coming every month.
Yeah, and so what convinced you to start taking this full time, to move away from the other things you're doing and really jump into what you're doing now?
Last year, towards the I want to say second half or a lot of last year, I think I was thinking about ownership as a creative person, and I look at my arc, sort of where I started, and I had started on my own blog. That's where I had started. And then over time, I went to other places. I went to write on Medium. I wrote for like 9 months straight on Quora, and I was active there for quite a while. I had built this little 4-minute books thing along the side. And I also observed, obviously what other writers were doing. And some I talked to, I don't know if you remember Newsbreak. It was like this in 2020, I think they came about. It's a local news site, and they had a creator program. They offered scholarships for people for a while. So people were like really hyper about that. I was on Twitter for a while. And so last year, around the time of my birthday, it was my 31st birthday, actually, not my 30th. But I was thinking, man, I've been on all these platforms, and like, what have I got to show for it at the end of the day? And of course, it's like there's a lot of followers here, a lot of followers there, but especially in terms of monetization, having sustainable income was just frustrating. I feel like I'm specifically not a digital nomad, and I'm not trying to be one. And I always take this like, I think you should be a digital settler. You should just go digital, but just stay in one place because you're going to be much more productive. But then I feel like I'm doing the opposite in what I'm doing online, right? Which is just going from platform to platform. Wherever the getting is good, you try to go there for a while. And I don't think that I don't know. I was like, I don't think that adds up over time. I don't think that makes sense long term. For me, at this point, I've decided I want to be a writer and I want to be writing focused. And I love books. I started writing my own books. So I was like, I know where I want to go. So maybe it's just time to stop and go home. And so I went to my own blog, back to where it started. And I was like, man, this place was so much fun when I started. And then I completely abandoned it over the years. And I haven't even been maintaining it well. And so instead of keeping up with the stories that I was publishing elsewhere. And so I started putting all those stories back to the blog and sort of just writing on it daily, also having a little group of readers. And I was like, man, this feels really good. Just own my stuff. It's my own site. It's my own stuff. And so at the end of last year, I looked back at the end of 2022, I looked back and I was like, I looked at everything in terms of money, in terms of business, in terms of finance, like how did that work out? So this is the creative part. Okay, I want to own that stuff there. But the financial part, it looked somewhat similar, right? The one place that had been working all this time, had been making money relatively consistently, new things we tried worked well, was 4-minute books. It's like over and over again. So whether I spent a lot of time on it or not, that was the thing that was working and just consistently, was just reliable, much more reliable than everything else. So I was like, yeah, maybe this is it. Maybe this is sort of your day job. This is the thing you're doing. This is the thing you're doing full time. And then your creative stuff, you're doing more on the side. And if the creative stuff ever takes off in a big way, that's great. And if not, then not. But I love also 4-minute books. I love sort of what it stands for, the message and everything. Everything that gets people to read is a win in my book. And so I was like, yeah, maybe this is the thing. It's been there right in front of your nose all this time. So why not just, do the thing that works? So, and that's how I decided to ultimately come back to it. And I plan to stick with this for the foreseeable future for now. Let's see how it all goes.
So what I think is really interesting, I think a lot of people listening should really pay attention to this as well, because becoming a creator is very, very faddy at the moment, right? Like everybody wants to become a creator because you can make so much money, and it's just not true for most people. But it's also sometimes true for some people for a short amount of time. And me and you both know loads of people who made a boatload of money at the beginning and then not really know what they want to do, right? Because some people have a particular area they're interested about and then they get bored or whatever it is. So they have something which is a bit different, but then everybody starts doing it and then they're no longer like separated. And to me, it's always the question of like, yeah, you can quit your job and become a creator, cool. But can you do that for 10 years? And there's very few people I know who have been able to sustain it for that long. And you mentioned earlier about Mark Manson, like Tim Ferriss, like Ramit Sethi, like they're the kind of like the OGs of the people who did it way back and have kept up. But how many other people started at the same time with them and aren't going anymore? So I think that's a question a lot of people have got to think about. If you're becoming a creator, you want to do writing or you want to do podcasts, whatever it is, how are you going to make that work for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? And this is where it's the same thing I'm coming around to, is having an actual proper business as well. So the creative side is swimming along something which is the business. So for you, it perfectly aligns, right? You have your creative writing, your own original thoughts, and people who like reading that are also probably going to like reading books. And that then makes them go to 4-minute books, which you can then monetize in different ways. And it's one of the interesting things is how do you monetize that? Because that's the difficult thing for many people, right? Is that you want to be creative, but sometimes when you monetize it, you can then you can kind of cage yourselves in some ways, but that needs to be done because otherwise, how do you keep this going long term? And I know you've moved on from Blinkist, right? So you're doing other different methods of monetization. Can you talk a bit more about that? Like, how did you make this a bit more sustainable?
Blinkist was the main revenue source, I want to say, until the end of 2019. So I think that's give or take 4 years. We were almost exclusively relying on Blinkist affiliate program as the main source of revenue. Again, some Amazon revenue along the sides. I think probably a bunch of other things that I tried that didn't really work out along the way. And then Blinkist moved the affiliate program, I think, to a new platform. And along with that, they also they changed the payout rate or the structure. And I think there was also a bug in the old system for a while where we got overpaid. And basically, Blinkist just did what businesses do, which is totally fine. They upgraded their system to a better system. They changed the payment structure along with it. But then basically overnight, I think I was like, man, this is like a 20% haircut on my revenue. That's not very nice. And and so I was like, okay, maybe it's time. Maybe the site is also big enough and that it can sustain another stream of revenue. Because what I did like about being focused in the beginning is that I didn't want to have a million things to peddle, because that's just exhausting. And I've tried that with my own creative stuff, and it's totally exhausting. And it usually also doesn't work when you're trying, because generally you don't have that much attention, right? Even if you have 100,000 followers on Twitter or wherever else, you don't have that much attention, especially not attention that you can monetize, where people are actually going to spend hard-earned dollars with you. So it was good for a while, but then at some point just came the point where we had to diversify. And from that point on, I tried a bunch of other affiliate programs. So I just tried to expand sort of in that same category, basically. Generally, that didn't work out super well, I want to say. It's mostly because for Blinkist, the search traffic just happens to be really high also. So there's a natural high demand for that product in the way we get traffic. So that works really nicely. Whereas for others, I found if products don't have that much search interest, which is surprising, even things like Evernote or Trello or products that millions of people use, they don't necessarily have a lot of search interest where you can bank on giving people valid information about that product and service and then referring them to it. That's probably why you see so many affiliate websites talking about laundry machines and whatever else, because at least those are like, everyone is always looking for a new laundry machine. And those are also very, very high ticket items. So even if you make a small commission, you make a reasonable amount of money. Whereas software generally pays out generous commissions, 40, 50, sometimes more %. But also the prices are usually somewhat low to begin with, right? So you might only make $10, $20, $30 for every conversion that you get. And so one of the other things I did is I made our own little product, which is a lifetime deal, which basically just gives you access to our same summaries in different forms. No ads, you got PDFs, we have audio for a lot of them. And it's also somewhat ghetto. We just give you access. Everything is hosted on our own website. You have different tutorials. You can download the stuff. You can sync it to your Kindle. But just adding that was a nice sort of diversification, because we could make like $1,000 a month in the beginning, sometimes more, sometimes less. We promoted in different phases of the year. So basically having our own little digital product, that was one thing that we did. Another thing that we did was ads. At some point, I started adding ads. I tried ads before, but it didn't work. It just wasn't worth the pay, basically. So I want to say we got around $1,000 a month, and I was like, do I really want to spam, like have all these ads in people's faces for that amount of money? And then later, someone I was working with suggested this other company called Mediavine. And I was like, okay, sure, let's give it another try. And we did that. And that actually turned out really well. And so last year, for example, our Blinkist revenue went down a little bit. And the ad revenue, which is something that we didn't have for the full year before, we just introduced that 2021 in August, I think, that eclipsed the other revenue. So it just went past it. And also looking back at that, I was like, man, this stuff is just crazy, right? It's like something you didn't have a year before becomes your main source of revenue, but then you still have some of the other revenue. So it's an additional, you just grow. And there's so many ways and things you can do. And usually on platforms, especially if the platform is locked into one business model, you don't have that kind of freedom. You can't just randomly add everything around that you want. Whereas in business, you can try a new business model anytime. Like just this week, I added something else where it's a company, it's called Sparkloop. I think you and I are both familiar with it. And they have a tool called Upscribe now, which is basically, it allows you to, when someone subscribes to your newsletter, you can suggest them other newsletters that you like and read, and they might also sign up for those in one go. And you get either paid commissions, or those newsletters will send you subscribers in return. So you kind of do a cross promotion thing. And we set that up this just last week, and I don't know exactly what it's going to turn out. We're starting to collect some data, but with any luck, that might be another valid income stream where it like really makes a meaningful difference to our monthly revenue, to the order of like 10, 20, 30%, if that pans out well. So, and that's the kind of freedom. Yeah, you have much more of that kind of freedom if you have a business or something that you just fully own. Whereas, yeah, if you're on platforms, usually you don't have that much wiggle room in terms of how you make your money.
So with ads, I think it's one of those areas that's become unsexy in some ways, right? Is that you don't really hear many internet entrepreneurs or online entrepreneurs talk about making money through ads. It's all from membership models, all for other different things. But you're making quite a significant amount of money from it. And it's interesting because even on my own site, I never even thought about adding ads to it because thinking, oh, I want a clean experience. But if you can make like enough money to live off of, then why wouldn't you in some ways? And then you can also then have a membership model which is ad free. You get all these different options. And in some ways, it actually makes you seem more credible if you've got a site which has got ads because you've got enough traffic for it to be worth it.
Mm-hmm. True, yeah.
But for example, with the Spark Loop there, you said about the membership model, the referring model as well. So that's really interesting because it's one of these things too about competition online where people often think you can only make money or you have to go against everybody else. Whereas what I'm increasingly finding is the way you really make money is by actually collaborating with people, by working as a team, because we do it ourselves, right? Like me and you talk, and then like you give me ideas, I give you ideas, we give feedback on each other's work, and that makes us grow much faster. And I'm sure there's some people listening who still think, oh yeah, I can do it all myself. How has the groups you've been part of and the masterminds you've been part of impacted your work and your business model?
Well, in one way, so if you're sort of in this peer group of people who are doing somewhat similar things, but not necessarily all the same things as you, I think the best thing is that you get to observe everybody. Besides, like I love talking with people and so on. I love doing one-on-one calls every few months with everybody, catching up. What are you up to? What are you doing? And those might spark these sometimes random insights where you're like, oh wow, I can apply this to my situation that I didn't really think of before. But I think the best part is just observing, like, what are people doing, right? And so with this platform thing, I'm seeing the same sort of frustration I had with the platforms. I see that in a lot of other people. And then irrespective of whether they continue to do that or not, I'm like, okay, I can already tell I'm not the only one who has this problem right now, right? So this is it's a common thing. So it's worth for me to think more about it. And in terms of reaching out to people, connecting with people, and so on. I'm not a big networking person by any means, right? I'm the guy who's like toiling away in this thing and perfectly happy doing that. But for example, you talked about growing the pie basically versus taking a slice of someone else's pie or trying to take a bigger slice of the pie for yourself. And that is so applicable, I think, to probably everything online. I always go back to the fact that I think now is probably more than half of people worldwide are online, but still there's a lot of people missing. And those people are coming. And so the internet hasn't even reached full 100% penetration yet globally, right? So that alone is like that is still a growth market. But in terms of, let's say, book summaries and ads and so on, so people always ask, in the beginning, I shared all of the summaries that I wrote with the authors on Twitter, right? So I would tweet at the author and I would say, hey, we summarized your book and so on. I would just see, do they react? Do they retweet, right? Is that some social proof that we're getting or what? And 99% of the time, the feedback was positive. And also in all the years that I did the summaries, I only had one instance, I think, where I had to take down a summary because the person managing the author's estate, actually, because the author had already passed, was sending me a letter to just take that down, basically. And I was like, I don't want any legal trouble, so I just did it. But that's the only case. And so no issues, because at the end of the day, a summary is also free press for your book, right? Like why, and best case scenario, people buy the book. So usually people are happy. And most of the authors also were like, yeah, this is cool. Very good summary, cool concept. I like this, and so on. So I think a lot of the time you sit there and you think you have this sort of zero-sum mentality. You think everybody else has that kind of mentality, but it's actually not true. And the same with a company like Blinkist. Sometimes people ask me like, oh, aren't you worried about sort of competing with them? Aren't you competing with them? Or what happens if you promote your own stuff versus Blinkist stuff? And I'm like, it's totally fine. You just have to explain what you're doing, and you just have to explain it properly and transparently to people. And then sometimes I'd say, look, like if you get our little deal, that's sort of, you're supporting this kind of indie creator site. You're helping us make more free summaries for you. If you go to Blinkist, you'll get the more professional experience. It's like way more resources, way more polished than what we could ever do, but it's a different experience, right? And so people are like, okay, yeah, I can choose between the two. So generally, and it's the same with the traffic on the search, right? Like people are just going to search. There's a million plus books coming out every year, and as more people come online, more people search for summaries. Generally, books that get more popular over time get more search interest over time. So that too is something that is growing. So if you have something that's somewhat dependable, and you're not trying to do, let's say, SEO for like news that are just coming out on a week by week basis where people might only search for it once, then that's also something where you can expect everything to grow. So I'm also generally in the camp of just trying to, if anyone emails me or says something, look, can we collaborate here? Can we do this? If it looks somewhat like there could be something there, I always try to like respond or think about it. Like, what can we do? How can we exchange? I talk to other owners of similar sites and in apps like InstaRead and so on, and just, hey, what is the book summary market doing? Where is it going? So this is just this constant exchange you have with people, be it in your peer group that you see coming up at the same time, or just industry peers. It's just helpful, and it also makes you remember that mostly everyone is nice, and people want to get along, and people are friendly, and they want to help. And so it's actually not this. It makes business a somewhat less lonely game than it might be when you're just looking at your spreadsheet and your revenue and your data, and you're like, how can I get more?
And one of those areas you've grown into recently is also YouTube, right? And you've had like different people that have helped you with that, and you've had the knowledge of the masses in some ways. But that's going very well too, right? So what was behind the YouTube strategy? Why did you get into YouTube?
Yeah, so YouTube is a perfect example of this whole connection thing, right? Because the guy, his name is Adam, and he has a YouTube channel called Betterment Boss that he operates quite successfully. He has like 200-something thousand subscribers. And I think he originally emailed me to turn one of my articles, my more creative personal stuff, into a video. And he did that. And I think he did that a few times for his channel. So he promoted my article basically, and he got a new video, he got new content out of it. And so in 2020, one of the other things we did, we got a licensing deal. So we were able to license some of our content to someone who then turned that content into something else and used it for their own app. And so that was the first time we had a bigger lump sum in cash. And I was like, okay, I can actually think about, how do I want to invest this money? What do I want to spend it on? And then one of the things I'd been thinking about already, because we had audio for a lot of our summaries, was like doing a YouTube channel. I always loved a good animation. I'm really a sucker for like a good animation video on YouTube. And so I was like, our summaries would fit really well with that. The format is short enough. And also, even at that time, even now, I think book summaries on YouTube is not that crowded of a market, surprisingly, right? And so I was like, okay, let's go for it. So I just invested a good chunk of that money. And I reached out to several people, but then ultimately Adam was the one who jumped on and said, hey, I can do the animations for you. And then we worked out an agreement, and we've been working together ever since. And so, yeah, and I figured YouTube is probably something that takes a long time. That's what I've observed, and that's what also people on YouTube will tell you. But I was like, now we have the cash, we have the opportunity to do this. So let's start it now. And then let's see how far we can get and how far we can take it. And so far, YouTube, it seems to be somewhat similar to SEO traffic, writing on your own blog, those kinds of things, where it's just more reliable. It's like once you get people, once you get traffic and you own the thing, it's more reliable. YouTube was pretty flat the first year. And I think I saw a video that most people make around 50 videos to 100 before they get monetized even. And for us also, the first year was just totally flat. And then in the second year, we had a nice bump, sort of a step function. And it went up. So now we started monetizing a little bit. And I'm hoping that in year 3 now, we can start breaking even on a monthly basis, where sort of what I spend on the content every month is the same that comes in every month through the YouTube ads. But we also started monetizing already a little bit with other things. So you can have sponsorships, you can place little sort of affiliate ads or something in your YouTube videos if you want. So we're trying to monetize it already a little bit with other things, but the main source is going to be the YouTube ad revenue. But so far it looks quite similar. And YouTube owns Google, so maybe that's not a coincidence. I don't know, that there's very search optimized, like very focused on longevity. But
well, Google owns YouTube, right?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
But so you've got the YouTube as one other wing you've got on to 4-minute books now. Have you got any other plans for the future? What's the future looking like for 4-minute books?
Another thing we added last year. So once I got rolling on the diversifying with the income streams, like I really got rolling, you can tell, is sponsorships. Because in the pandemic, newsletters have become very big, email newsletters. And this whole newsletter economy sort of sprung up. And now you have places like Morning Brew, 1440, like million subscriber plus email newsletters. And with that came the platforms to help monetize those newsletters. And so there are things that let you put ads, like I think like actual banner ads into your newsletters, which Pave, the company, is doing. There's places like SwapStack and Sparkloop, and they help you find sponsors and talk to those sponsors and arrange deals. So that's one thing I'm playing with. I've tried sending a bunch of newsletters to the 4-Minute Books readers, and hey, this might be relevant. This is like 4-Minute Books, but for the news, right? So that's a product that's sort of related to what we're doing, and it might be a really good fit for you. So I plan to do a little more with that and just see sort of whether that's a viable thing. Then the ads, I'm still trying to scale with the traffic now. Affiliate models, I'm always open to, if there's a new affiliate model where I'm like, okay, we could probably make this sort of integrate this into our strategy, where it's not just we have a review and we hope that people are coming via Google, but we can sort of consistently promote it in one place. So there might be something there. And then one other thing I haven't really pulled the trigger on yet, but I really am thinking about, is doing a membership, because I was always hesitant to do a membership or a subscription model, because there's already so many out there. We all have subscription fatigue already because we're paying for like 10 things already. And things like Spotify, Netflix, and so on, they offer so much value for the money, and they're the clear choice in their markets. But even there, you can see with Amazon, Disney Plus, like the streaming market has become somewhat fractured. And now some people are stuck holding on to $50 worth of TV subscriptions every month, and others were like, well, I got to pick, right? So I gotta make my choice here. And so I was like, I never really want to play in that market with the book summary market, because the book summary market is somewhat similar in that regard. That there's Blinkist, there's Get Abstract, there's a bunch of other players, but there's already a lot out there. And one of the things that always pushed me back further from this is that we don't have an app, and developing apps is very expensive if you want to do it properly. And so I was always sort of refraining from that. But now I'm realizing, hey, a membership, like if you have a membership on a website, Mark Manson has a membership on his website, right? Like going back to those people, and he offers additional value in different formats and so on. But it's much more centered around, I think, him as a creator and him as a person. And people know when they buy a Mark Manson membership, they're supporting him and not necessarily the platform that it goes through, not Spotify. There's not a huge cut being taken somewhere. And so I think memberships a lot of people are doing it partially because of the value that they get, but not solely because of the value that you get, right? When you have a more faceless corporation that you're getting a subscription from, all you care about is price. When you have a membership about a creator or a website even that makes something cool that you like, you're much more willing to give something extra, or part of your subscription fee is sort of just for that connection to the person. You want to support that person. And so I'm thinking maybe that could actually be a viable option for us. We have a lot of content. I've made courses. I could add all my courses in there about writing, about reading, about various other things. So I'm thinking maybe there is a model there that works for us. And you can have a membership be mobile optimized as well. So you don't necessarily even need an app. And it would still be something very different that's very focused on us. People come to us through the website. They think about 4-Minute Books in the first instance. Why not get a 4-Minute Books membership? And I don't even need people to necessarily think about, okay, how does this stack up against something like Blinkist and so on. So I'd rather sort of play in my own category and just be in my own little group, basically, rather than join a big market where a lot of big players are already competing, and I can't compete because I just don't have the same resources.
I think there's so many different options now as well. And what's nice is that I think with our bubble, right, people who are on Medium, initially started their careers on Medium, you can get stuck if thinking about how do you make more money from Medium, rather than like, actually, I've got these skills that are really useful, that could be really valuable to a lot of people out there. What's the best way to get that message out there? And like, I love the membership as well, because it's something I'm thinking about too, and we've discussed this, because I'd rather get those people who are super fans to pay and make most of my content free than to try and sell that $1,000 course, $2,000 course. Because in the long term, I think that's harder to keep trying to pump out or be in that sales mode all the time. Whereas for a $10 membership, or whatever it's going to cost, you don't feel too bad about asking somebody for $10. And it's just like easier long-term strategy. If somebody's listening now who maybe they've started writing or they've started trying to dip their toe into the online world, what advice would you give them to say, like, to make their career both fruitful and long?
I think this is I would think about ownership. And I think we also spoke about this before. Some of the people I admire and where I think this is something I should have done better is being more consistent in insisting on owning my work. And I mean that more not in the sense of taking responsibility for it. That's sort of a given. You kind of always have to do that to make something valuable. But I mean that now in a more like in an intellectual property sort of sense, having your own little. I always think about digital real estate. Like you have your own little corner of the web where you have your own website, whether you use WordPress or something to set it up, right? But you don't set it up on another platform and you just only use that as your blog. You have that place where everything goes first. So it's your stuff. And again, like that's the people I admire. I think they've done this really well, where they were thinking about their own place, their own sort of creative work like first and owning that. And then from that place, they ventured out to other places and they shared it. So James Clear, for example, there's still some articles online, I think, where he talks about in his initial guest publishing or a syndication strategy. So he basically posted an article twice a week on his website, but then he syndicated those articles to places like Lifehacker, Forbes Entrepreneur, wherever else. But always it would link back to the original. So he would always make sure that sort of ultimately everything flows back to his website. Like back from when I started, there were a lot less options in terms of platforms, what you could do, especially as a writer, but also as a creator in general, right? There was no TikTok then. There was no money to be made on Medium. There was not things like Newsbreak. And then now you have places like Substack. You have all kinds of tools and platforms and ways where you can go. So it's really easy to get baited into one or all of them potentially sequentially. You always realize, this over time, 6 months later, you're like, this platform has this problem. This platform has that problem. So in the end, I did a very long trip. It was a very long round trip to go back to my own website at the end of the day and realize, man, this is the place where I should be writing first. And it doesn't mean I can't do all the other things and try to get distribution and try to get attract new people to my work, but to think about ownership first and just make sure that you have your copyright, like your intellectual property, the ownership, that part is sort of secured and you have that covered. Because if it's going to be a long-term thing for you, and you might not know that, but if that's your aspiration, if you want it to be a long-term thing, you're going to need that. Otherwise, you keep trawling from platform to platform and you don't have anything to show for it at the end of the day. So I would think through the whole ownership problem from the get-go, and I would spend a good amount of time thinking about how you want to handle that before you start.
So one thing I know you do is you have a word of the year each year. So as the final question, what is your word for this year and why is that your word?
Oh, that's a great question. I love it. I love that you remembered that. Thank you. It's very good. So I try to set a theme every year. I've been doing it for a few years, and I really like word noun combinations. So a word that can double as both a verb and a noun, because it gets me both to do, but then also to think about the bigger picture. And this year, I went back to focus. Focus was one of my first themes, I think, in one of the first years, and I went back to that because everything we just talked about, right? It's about going back to sort of what works, what you know, what you own. And so I just want to focus on 4-Minute Books. I want to focus on the business side. I just want to make that a very sustainable business that can sort of help me keep the creative side afloat. That's more tricky to work out over time and help sustain that. So yes, my word for the year is focus. And I think that's a good pick for anybody. I think in almost any year. Some others, if you want to think about them, is like commit. I think I had grow, invest. Joy I had for 1 year. That was also lovely. So there was much less business focused. You could do love or things like that. But it's very cool because then this theme becomes sort of this lens that you view your actions through, both over time and on a day-to-day basis. And if you have a wallpaper on your desktop or on your phone somewhere, you'll have a constant reminder. So if you want to, I would encourage everyone to think about sort of what could be my word of the year. But for me, it's going to be focus, and I feel actually pretty good about that.
Perfect. So if people want to hear more about what you're doing and what 4-Minute Books is doing, where should they go to?
Sure. So 4-Minute Books, you can find it at 4minutebooks.com. You can just spell it out as one word. If you Google 4-Minute Books, you'll also find it. And my personal stuff is all at nick.art. So it's nik.art. And that's where my personal blog is. I'm publishing there daily now. I have like very little short posts. And I also have a newsletter where I keep people posted on, do I have a book coming out? Am I doing some other creative project? So those are the best places to go, I think.
So really enjoyed talking about this. And it's interesting to me as well to really dive deeper into your business side, because obviously we chat about everything and anything usually.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me. It was great.